everyone. I'm Carol, and I'm here with Sarah, two of our three people who started this work last year. And just a refresher, our teacher residency is on our fifth cohort, and we're quite small but mighty. We have 32 residents this year. So one of the big things that we were looking into was the conditions and practices that enable our BIPOC residents to form wonderful, positive, sustainable, productive relationships with their white cooperating teachers, and then also looking at our BIPOC cooperating teachers working with our white residents and the cultural mismatch that often occurs. And so we were looking at, given the resources that are available to us and the assets that our CTs have and the assets that our student teachers bring, what mentorship stances are going to best support this relationship that actually is not just existing, but thriving? And how do we best sustain and nurture these relationships, given, as somebody mentioned, the time constraints with limited touches with the CTs, and especially the CTs and their residents at the same time. We have very little time where we have them together to work on that. So what we did was create some focus groups and hold some interviews with residents and cooperating teachers separate from one another. And also did some cycles where we tried a new routine with our CTs and tried some status interventions and tried to purposefully create relationships, because we realized we really had to nurture them, that some cooperating teachers are really great at that and some really needed some guidance. So that is what we worked on. And what we learned was that productive learning partnerships across the lines of difference need spaciousness, inquiry cycles. The CTs present as learners and the CTs present as experts. And so in that, the spaciousness was the mentors need to allow their CTs room within their classrooms, like physical space and teaching space, interest space, everything for them to just be and show up authentically, to show up as the expert in some way. So if there's something that they were very knowledgeable about or very interested in, that the CTs needed to not just allow that, but encourage that into their space. We also created inquiry cycles that we don't really have a fancy name for just yet. And I think Sarah's going to talk about it a little bit more, but it's a protocol of guided inquiry. So we changed the topic kind of based on things that we're seeing going on with our residents, things that we were seeing with issues. Because one thing too with our program, Sarah and I realized one year we put out way too many fires. So we were trying to prevent the fires so we didn't have to be Smokey the Bear all the time. So we were trying to groom and nurture positivity throughout. So we encouraged our cooperating teachers to reflect on whatever the inquiry was at the time with their peers, reflect on how they dealt with issues, share out with each other, and then think about how their residents, where their residents' thinking might be around that topic. And we also looked at CTs as the learners, in that what could their resident bring to them? What could their resident bring to the class? Where was their resident maybe an expert where they weren't? And it's partly, to let your resident have that moment to shine, but also remember what it's like to be the vulnerable learner and connect a little bit more closely. And then the CTs as experts, in that they're grounding their learning and instructional knowledge and their wisdom, like what do they believe and why do they believe that? And then moving into how are they going to share that with their residents. And Sarah, did you want to add anything before I click to the next slide?
No, we're going to double click briefly on those, what Carol was describing. But Carol, if you don't mind going to the last slide first, I realize we put them out of order. So this is something I'm excited about that came out of this work that I think we, for lack of a better phrase, are thinking of kind of as a status intervention around, because we noticed that in situations where cooperating teachers and residents were not forming productive learning partnerships, there's a lot of deficit thinking, frankly, from both sides. And sometimes it played into racial stereotypes, and sometimes it was more about age and gender and noviceness. But there was a lot of from folks who sort of didn't get to the point where they could really trust and learn together. It was cooperating teachers who really saw their student teachers as walking buckets of not yet. Like, oh, they don't know how to do that yet. They don't know how to manage a classroom. They don't know how to, plan a lesson, rather than doing what we all think hard about doing with young people, which is like, what do they know? What do they care about? What are they coming in with? What are their funds of knowledge? So we've been thinking really hard about how to help our cooperating teachers develop the stance, which is more about what do these residents come with, not what do they come without, and start there as a foundational point for relationship building. And in some cases, our residents come with cultural funds of knowledge that are really robust and more matched to what goes on in the classroom than our predominantly white cooperating teachers do. So we have one day, we have lots of time with our residents and lots of time with our cooperating teachers, but we don't have much time together for logistical reasons. So we have one day in the summer where we get the group together. And we've already spent a bunch of time with the residents building their culture and community. We've spent some time with the CTs, but we have this one day. And this work really led us to think about that day differently and to focus pretty intensely on that piece around productive learning relationships and centering the assets that our residents bring in the relationship. So 2 things we tried, which this was the first time we tried it this summer, and it went really well, although I'm sure we'll continue iterating, is number one, we wrote up a case study. It's about 2 pages long of a awarded resident cooperating teacher relationship. And it's sort of an amalgamative case study. It's not actually one relationship, but we drew in a lot of strands that we've seen over the years when you have sort of a failure to build a productive relationship across lines of difference. And we layered into that case a lot of things that often happen when that relationship doesn't go well. In particular, we layered in, without trying to say it explicitly, this idea that the cooperating teacher was not finding a way to see their resident as an asset and to see what their resident was bringing to the table right away. So we spent a bunch of time unpacking and analyzing that case study with our residents, and then we did the same thing with our cooperating teachers, and we went through a case protocol that we believe, based on what emerged, helped them sort of identify that idea that when things go wrong, it's often around those 2 learning partners not seeing each other as learners and not seeing each other as experts. So that was part 1. And then part 2, on that one day, then when we got them together, one of the big pieces that we did on that day is we had our CTs and resident pairs participate in a 2-hour-long project design sprint, which is sort of a rapid iteration of curriculum. But the sort of conceit of it was that the residents brought a topic that they were passionate about or deeply knowledgeable about. So they had to design a project under a lot of time constraints around something that the resident knew a lot about. So we were trying to center the residents' funds of knowledge right away. And we positioned the CTs as experts in curriculum design, right? Because the residents hadn't started their program yet. So the idea is the cooperating teachers bring their knowledge of kids, developmental ages, curriculum building, and the actual content in question was not about necessarily academic content, but the idea is, if a resident is passionate about local sports teams, all right, we're rapidly designing a prototype for a project that's about local sports teams for our hypothetical 4th graders or whatever. And that was really beautiful. It actually for some of them, turned into projects that they actually taught with their kids. And we really saw it as an effective status intervention it's not sufficient, but we saw it as like the way to really begin the work of helping CTs see what the residents do know, not just what they don't know, helping the residents feel like they get to be an authority from the very beginning, even though they also haven't had any formal training. And we're really puzzling through, like, how do we sustain that work? So not just launch it, but then how do we kind of touch back on it so we can continue to nurture that sort of stance that we have a theory based on what we've heard and what we've learned that can really help move those pairs past that mismatch point where they're kind of seeing each other as not in ways that are productive to learning partnerships. And I think I'll just stop there. We have a routine that Carol described briefly that's on the slide before, that we have been piloting with our CTs when we see them just alone. They're not with their residents, where we're asking them to think about their residents' thinking as well as their own. But I think this one was the one that we were most excited about, that came most directly from this line of inquiry.